Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show this afternoon. And, for me, the biggest part of leaving the United States Army after doing 20 years is really answering the big question of what do I want to be when I grow up? And that's really an identity shift when everything about you, when you wear the uniform, is really stacked on you, right? You have your name, your rank, we say accoutrements, right? It lists your skills, everything that you achieved. And so when you walk in through a door, your rank and those accoutrements signifies the skill set that you are, what you've achieved as an individual within the organization. And that opens so many doors. The singular fact that you are a soldier opens so many doors. And I left the United States Army as Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn, which is, quite a high rank. And leaving that's a shift. Now it's just Olivia Nunn. I walk in through a door and I'm just dressed even if I'm dressed nicely in a beautiful ball gown because I'm a pageant queen, there's nothing there that signifies the accoutrements or the level of achievement that I may have possessed at one point, the glass ceilings that I have broken. So for me, it's all of the things that I have to now learn and then at the same time unlearn in a way when I walk into a room and answering, what do I want to be outside of that uniform? Who am I outside of that uniform? And who am I when I'm no longer part of this big organization that I once served? And that is a really hard question to answer.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote, if you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. And I think people feel it's just going to be that simple. If I can just picture what I want, I'm going to manifest it. But the reality is you've got to do a lot more than just that. You've got to have significant behavioral shifts. So leaving the military and returning to civilian life, what were the behavioral changes you had to make?
A lot, right? So I spent a good portion of my career oftentimes being the only woman. So the military is very male dominated. Women only make about 18% of the military. So when I say male dominated, it is very male dominated. And not only was I in an industry that's male dominated, I spent oftentimes in units where I was the only woman in this industry. So I spent a lot of time where my posture, my facial expression, and the words that I used was very forward, aggressive, and forward leaning in the way that I sat as well or walked. And that doesn't always work in some of the environments that I now find myself in. And I have to learn how to dial back some of that presence. And I have to learn how to smile more. I hear this all the time. My sister's friends tell me, you're kind of scary. Like, Olivia, you have a beautiful smile. You're actually very warm and nice, but that's not what I initially think of you when I first see you, because you've got this, this stern look about you as if you're going to pounce on me and tear me apart, which I find, hysterical because I'm, 5'1". Your viewers can't see that, but I'm not that tall of a person, but my presence says otherwise. And so I've had to learn how to dial back that and learn how to be more welcome and warm just by the nature of how I present myself and the language that I use. I like to use a lot of colorful language. One of it starts with the letter F. A lot of places, that's not normal. Also, how we use our hands. There's a lot of ways in which the military, we call it the knife hand. That's not welcomed in a lot of ways. In many ways that can be welcoming if you're trying to get some points across, but for the most part, what I've noticed in the civilian world, that doesn't necessarily work. So you do have to shift in the way that you think and act and talk.
Mm-hmm. Many years ago, I met a lot of men who had transitioned out of the military into civilian life, and they thought they were automatically going to be successful because they could take their disciplines from the military into business. And what they found was that in the first 6 to 12 months, they kind of just waited around, waiting for somebody to instruct them, to tell them what to do. And this was a huge shift for them because in the military, in their rank, somebody always told them what to do. And then they always had to report back to the sergeant major. And they got out into the civilian world and they were waiting to be told, pick up the phone and start calling, follow up a customer, close on the customer. And so somebody wasn't telling them all the time. And then because somebody wasn't watching and they didn't have to report back, they didn't do the things that were necessary. And it was a behavior that they really had to adjust because after their 1 and 2 decades in the military, it was really ingrained into them. And so they had to go through that transition. Yes, they had the goal, they could see what they wanted, but they also had to become a very different person in order to have these new goals. And for them, it came with a lot of stress. And there was many different types of emotions that they went through. They were frustrated about their results. They felt rejected because people weren't listening to them. They started to fear losing their stability because they're thinking, gee whiz, I thought this was going to be so much easier. And then they made many mistakes, and we all do that on the journey. So that emotional change was a big one for them. How did you manage your emotions through that process of transition?
For me, I think one way, so I think my journey was traditional in many aspects, I think, for in the way that military transition, and then it was untraditional. And let me unpack that. So I left the military, like I said, as a senior officer. And for me, that scenario was a little different. I don't necessarily have that in ways in which I don't necessarily need someone to tell me to do something. Like I'm a self starter and I have the discipline to do that because I'm a senior leader and that's kind of the area in which I operate. But what was very traditional is what I mentioned earlier. I was losing my identity. It was very rough. I had to figure out who I was going to be. It was literally, I was divorcing the army. But what was happening at the same time as I was divorcing the army was I was going through an actual divorce in my real life. I had been with my partner at the time, my husband, somebody that I'd been with for 20 years. So he'd been with me from the start of my career till the end of my career. And he was also another fellow Army officer. So we spent 20 years together. And here, we were leaving the Army together. We had plans to have a life together. And everything that I thought and knew and what we planned was crashing down. And that was extremely tough for me. And everything that I thought I knew had basically just been wiped away. And so I crashed and burned. And what was extremely tough for me at the same time was I was supposed to be an expert at transitioning for the Army. And what your listeners don't know is my last job in the United States Army was US Army Soldier for Life, which was in the business of transitioning service members. So here I am, a lieutenant colonel in the Army. I'm supposed to be an expert of transitioning service members. I knew all the resources, I knew all the players, I knew how to actually do the transition. And I'm going through the transition myself, and I'm crashing and burning. My husband and I went through an unexpected divorce. It was during COVID, and I had a hard time asking for help, literally uttering the words help. And when I had gotten to the point where I was about to end my life, I actually finally reached out for help. And when I was asking for help, what I found out was there weren't enough resources when it comes to military mental health. And the conversation went pretty much like this. When I made those calls, Livia, we know exactly who you are. We would love to help you, but unfortunately, our resources are tapped out. We might be able to get to you in 6 months, but really, best case is in a year. And at that point, I didn't think I even had 6 days left in me. So, what was I to do? I was able to find a resource that was willing to help me, but I was told no numerous times. And for me, I think that's where it was a little unconventional is I crashed and burned and I almost took my life. And for me, it's like, how do I find me, right, in all of this? How do I go on? How do I transition? And that I think is tough.
It's real. My grandfather, he was ex Air Force. I also did a project down in Victoria, in a state in Australia, and I was living with a gentleman who'd been serving in the Falkland Wars, and the PTSD for him was real. I remember him waking up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning and running through the house trying to jump through the windows. And when he sought help, there was also no help for him. And one of the parts of Australian culture is often asking for help is not a sign of strength, it's a weakness. So people suffer in silence for many, many years. And that emotional journey is real. I left Emirates Airline, and I remember 2012, I left and I thought everything was going to be fine. My wife had had an accident on an aircraft. She had been in rehabilitation for 2.5 years. And I thought, okay, I'm going to leave and I'm going to be fine. But I went down into that pit of despair. And for me, I thought I was having breathing problems. I thought I must have had pneumonia. So I said to my wife, can you take me to the hospital? And I went to the hospital. Doctors checked all the vitals and they said, Mr. Tolson, there's nothing wrong with you. And I said, really? They said, it's all in your head. You come to the wrong place. You better go to the psychologist. And for me, I had gone down into that pit of despair. And for everything that I knew about coaching, that I knew about mental and emotional health, I couldn't help myself at that stage. I really needed somebody's help. And like you, it probably took me a good 6 months to find the right help. Because, yes, I did take medicine, but I took the medicine. I was like, that's not what I want. The feelings are numb, but those same crazy thoughts are there. That's not the solution. But it was a journey on the way out. Now that you've got out of that pit of despair and you've moved on, how's life changed for you?
So I say that transition is transformation, and life is full of transformations. And I will say that there's been lots of high highs, but there still are a lot of low lows. So after leaving the military, I went into government contracting. So I was a public affairs officer for the United States Army. I gained a lot of notoriety when I was in the Army because I created a podcast on behalf of the Army. I went literally around the world. In fact, I went to Australia to present on behalf of the United States Army. And I, gained a lot of attention in terms of the work that I was doing. And I loved what I did. I loved the mission that I did on behalf of the Army. And I transitioned to using the same skill set and went into government contracting, becoming a public affairs officer. And while the work was relatively easy, it brought no pride and joy for me. And I actually didn't like the work in terms of the people. The people were, there was nothing wrong with them, but there just wasn't this sense of satisfaction. And I found myself going back down into that pit of despair where I literally, there were moments driving home from work that I wanted to end my life again. Like I had contemplated driving into a wall. There just were days that it was just that horrible. And I just remember thinking to myself, why am I in this place again? I shouldn't be here. I fought so hard to leave that place. Why am I finding myself here again? And I realized that, and, based on certain conversations, people in the right place at the right time. And I'd been told for, a couple years when I'd been in the Army before I had retired, Olivia, you should really go into business for yourself. You've got the skill set, you know what you're doing, you know, go work for yourself. And I think finally all those things clicked. And so I actually did do just that. And at the beginning of this year, February of 2023, I went all in on myself and I really said, you know what, I'm going to work for myself. My company had already been created, but it was just kind of sitting there. It was Olivia Nunn Communications LLC, but I decided in February of 2023 that I'm going to take clients. This is going to be my full time job, and I'm not going to work for somebody else. And that's what I did. But in so many ways, it's this amazing ride. I'm a pageant queen. I've been able to talk about military mental health as a pageant queen on the national stage, um, and do these great things. But at the same time, there's been these lows because it is tough being an entrepreneur, right? You don't always have clients. The money can be slow, and that eats at you. That eats at you in a way. Are you confident? Are you capable? Are you cut out for this? Is this where you're supposed to be? And it makes you question everything who you are, and that gets at you, and that's tough. And so, you just find yourself in moments of darkness again. And so for me, it is literally a journey every single day.
When I was in aviation, 2008, 2009, we went through the global financial crisis, and I loved flying. I loved being on the aircraft. But as soon as the flights slowed down, we were sitting on our bums and we were bored. And all I wanted to do was get back to work. And I remember calling my duty controller, is there any flights? They're like, Daniel, you're on a day off. I'm like, I want a flight. I'm bored. Get me back on the aircraft. And I remember that same feeling when I started business. Like when I was on the aircraft, I was having a high. When I had a client, I'd have a high. But then I'd have a break and this boredom would kick in. And then the mind would start to wander and think about all the other things. And I remember in 2013, I'd start to think about going back to the airlines. Okay, well, I'd go into these Facebook groups and watch everybody else having fun, look at my life. Then I'd go back and see if applications were open. They're not open. And instead of working on the business, I was just daydreaming about what I'd come from. And I found it very hard to let it go. But I also realized that I had a lot of skills, I had a lot of resources, and I just hadn't really leveraged them. So from your time in the military, what were some of those skills and disciplines that you took away that have helped you in becoming an entrepreneur?
Definitely discipline, right? I am a stickler for attention to detail. One of the commanders that I worked for, he's now retired, General Funk. He always said that if you looked up in the dictionary the word tenacity, you would see my name right next to it. And that's the one thing is I would drive, and I would consistently just drive until the mission was complete. And sometimes to my own detriment, right? Where I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't stop to go to the bathroom or eat, or just because I wanted to get the mission done. I placed the mission first. And attention to detail, it's the small little things, I believe. It was something that I did in college, and I think it's part of my culture as well. I'm Korean American, that the Army allowed me to hone in. The small attention to detail allows you to be very agile, and allows you at the same time to hone in on the important pieces when you back out, when you look at the larger picture. And so I take that same skill set that I learned in the military, from everything from doing mission planning to being a troop commander to being a writer for the military when I was writing, big messages on behalf of the United States Army. And I do the same thing for my clients. And it always starts simply by saying, I ask my clients, who are you? What are you? And to whom are you talking to? Sounds like three simple questions, but when you start going into the details of those three questions, then you can really hone in on what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And when you go back to those three questions consistently over and over and look at the details of those questions, that's where you find success.
That tenacity to see it through to the end, I think if we could all learn to develop that over time, we'd be much better entrepreneurs. Because some people are really good at starting things. They get these $1 million ideas and they start, but they never see it through to the end. And as an athlete, we always had to do three things. We had to start a trick, we had to maintain composure in the air, and then we had to land it and ride away. And that was the three disciplines. And here in business, once you start, it's easy to quit. It's easy to give up on your dreams. It's easy to be overcome by the fears. And there's a lot of fears, and they're real, and they only get bigger, but you just learn to manage them better along the way. But you've also got to see it through to the very end. And in business, one of the big reasons why you want to see it through to the end is because you've got to give that how should I say it? You've got to fulfill your promise to your client. And it's once you fulfill your promise, then you'll get the recommendation and referral, not before. See, in traditional sales, people used to ask for a referral during the sales process. They would ask for one at the time of the sale. But today's buyers, they say, you make a promise to me, you fulfill your promise, and then I'll give you the referral. And most businesses today, at least 80 to 90% of your business should be referral based. And then you've got to go out and you've got to search for new people to replace old customers. But you should be getting so much referrals, but they only come by completing the mission or doing the job. And a lot of people have to learn that about business. And if you refuse to quit in business, then ultimately, I believe you're going to succeed, because so many people can start a business, they can't maintain them, and they never see it through to the end. We know the numbers. Most businesses fail in the first 2 years. Majority of businesses turn a profit on the 7th year. And after the 7th year, you look around, you realize there's actually not that much strong competition. And that's a beautiful quality to have, tenacity. I think one confusion in the marketplace today because of social media is people think everything's got to be viral. I've got to get 100,000 views on this video. I've got to get 1 million views, and that's going to solve all of my problems. My business is going to miraculously explode overnight. What's your take on that? Is going viral on social media going to grow your business?
No. I think I'm probably on the camp of the opposite end of that. Now, let me preface that by saying I believe social media is absolutely an important part of your communication strategy. But it isn't the only thing, nor is it the most important part. And I say that because when you are looking at those people that have figured out how to use social media to sell something, that's usually what you're looking at from a viral perspective. That's great. And hats off to them. And we should applaud them. I'm not going to take anything away from them. But at the end of the day, this is what I look at. They are not a communication specialist. So if the platform, heaven forbid, ever go away or something changes or the algorithm changes, can they flex with it? Can they change with it? And whom are they without that platform? That's the question that I'm always asking my client when they are bringing me that type of scenario. Because at the end of the day, I don't need just social media to survive as a communication specialist. My skill sets reach beyond that. If you need to get in front of the camera, I can prepare you for that. Write a communication strategy, I could do that as well. There's so much more to being a communication specialist than just making some content be viral on social media. But it is a tool, and that's exactly what it is. Social media, when you understand communications, it is part of tactics and strategy, right? It's a tool set that you use. So, would I want my clients to be viral? Yes, we'll get there, but it takes time. It's all about strength in numbers, quantity in terms of making sure that we do it right, build a strong base, vulnerability, being authentic, and quality. And that's where I think is more important. I want my clients to build something on social media where their consumers really know them. And this is what I say. If your clients or the consumers of my clients should ever meet them, they should feel like they know them, because you're not selling something, you're telling a story. It's about you. And oh, by the way, you happen to be doing this or you happen to be selling this, because really the story is about you. You're the brand, right? That is the beauty of it, because people want to know you. I mean, that's why do we have celebrity gossip? Why do we follow paparazzi? It's not what they're selling. It's we want to know about the person. That's just us as humans. And that's what I'm driving at. I want people to know my client, and it's about storytelling. Craft that story.